I think we're ready to begin. I believe we're live on Facebook, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you everyone for tuning in. This is Women, Youth, and the Future of Work, Inclusion in Challenging Times. Our webinar today is proudly hosted in partnership with Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, or FES Egypt, and is part of A2K4D's 10th annual workshop titled Beyond COVID-19, Data, AI, and the Future of Work, Global Issues and Local Challenges. Just a few notes before we get started to avoid any mishaps throughout the webinar. To our speakers, please make sure that you're muted throughout when you're not speaking for as little disruption as possible. To our audience, video enabling is off for connectivity reasons, but you're welcome to turn it on if you like. The Q&A session will take place in the last 20 minutes of the meeting, but I encourage you to please ask your questions as they come to you. And you can do this in the Zoom chat box or Facebook comments or tweet them using our hashtag A2K10. Speaking of hashtags, please make sure to follow A2K4D, FES, and our lovely speakers for today on Twitter and elsewhere for future events and updates about their work. So moving on to our speakers. Today, we're very pleased to welcome a remarkable group of speakers, beginning with Nada Shousha, who is a regional advisor to the International Finance Corporation for their programs Banking on Women and Women on Boards. Nada is currently a vice chair and investment committee member of the Egyptian American Enterprise Fund, a board member and chair of the risk committee of Bank of Palestine, a board and audit committee member of AXA Egypt, a board and remuneration committee member of MS Pharma Jordan, a board member and chair of the audit committee of Dewi Clinics, and a member of the investment committee of AUC Ventures. Nada has also recently been appointed to the board of Orascom Construction as an independent non-executive director. Also joining us is Ayman Ismail, an international expert in entrepreneurship and economic development. Ayman is currently the Abdul Latif Jameel Endowed Chair of Entrepreneurship and Associate Professor at the American University in Cairo, AUC School of Business, and the founding director of AUC Venture Lab, AUC Angels, and AUC Innovation Hub. Ayman is also a co-founder, angel investor, or board member in several fast-growing startups in fintech, microfinance, and logistics. He received his PhD in International Economic Development from MIT. I'm also very pleased to welcome Ahmed Abaza, founder and managing partner at Synapse Analytics, a data science and AI company based in Cairo designed to assist businesses, organizations, and governments leverage data in streamlining operations. Ahmed holds a bachelor's degree in electrical and electronics engineering from the German University in Cairo, and works to help regional enterprises benefit from the use of AI. And of course, A2K4D founding director, professor of economics at AUC, and faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society, Professor Nagla Riz. In addition to the aforementioned, Dr. Nagla is also affiliated fellow of Yale Law School's Information Society Project and associate member of the University of Ottawa's Center for Law, Technology, and Society, as well as a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on the New Economic Agenda and the Executive Committee of the International Economic Association. So to start off our panel, we're also very delighted to be hosting member of the State Parliament of North Rhine-Westphalia, Christina Kampmann. Before I say any more about that, let me give the floor to Richard Probst, resident representative at FES, to tell us more about Christina. Richard, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Farah. Also very warm welcome from Cairo, from Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and our office here in Egypt. My name is Richard and I welcome you all to this webinar. And before introducing Christina more properly, let me first of all say thanks to A2K4D for our cooperation. And usually when we do panels, FES as an organization always striving for gender equality, we try to have a gender equal panel. With A2K4D, this is never a problem because we always have a gender equal panel and there are always more women on the panel. And this is a great pleasure actually always working with you, Nagla, and your entire team. As a resident director of FES, I'm very pleased and grateful to have Christina with us on board. Christina is a member of the board of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. And Christina, you visited you visited us here in Cairo last November. This year, unfortunately, it's not possible, but we hope for next year. Christina, as you mentioned, is a member of the State Parliament of North Rhine-Westphalia, which is the biggest and the most populated region in Germany. Within Parliament, she is the spokeswoman for the Committee on the Digital Agenda and Innovation. And she has been already, as member of the German Parliament, been very much involved in digital affairs and digital policies. After her time at the German Parliament, she became Minister of Youth and Family Affairs in North Rhine-Westphalia. So I think she is the right person to have on this panel today, speaking about inclusion of women and youth. I'm very pleased, Christina, and thank you very much for being with us, taking the time. And yeah, floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you, Farah, dear Nagla, dear all. Thanks for inviting me today for a few welcome remarks, which I really gladly do. It is great to have such an amazing lineup of speakers with us, and I'm really looking forward listening and learning from all of you. Let me first of all tell you how delighted I am to open this webinar. Let me congratulate A2K4D for the organization of the 10th annual conference. Over the last 10 years, your conference became a landmark event. This is a great achievement, I think, and a reason to celebrate, maybe not only today, for some days. This year, you organized the conference in a digital format, and of course, as much as we like to come together in person, hopefully next year again, we can see what opportunities the digital transformation entails. It is, after all, great to see that it is possible for me to join you today virtually from my hometown, Bielefeld, and with my 7-week-old twins. It is amazing to know that we have participants streaming this conference and participating from all around the world. All of you participating virtually without producing a big carbon footprint. This shows the digital transformation offers increased opportunities for participation and also for the urgently needed socio-ecological transformation. Women, Youth, and the Future of Work, Inclusion in Challenging Times is the title today. And as a member of the Parliament, you already mentioned that in the Commission on Digital Transformation, I'm not only interested in technical advancements, but also the social effects of the digital transformation we are currently experiencing. Women and youth are two groups which should be in the center of our attention when we talk about the digital transformation. Why is this the case? We all know that these two groups are already currently too often left out in our male-dominated world. Women and youth are disadvantaged in our economies. This applies, by the way, I think, to almost all countries. And in a country like Egypt, I see it of extreme importance to ensure a better inclusion of youth and women. However, let me be very honest with you, women and youth need also much more attention in Germany as well. That is why we have to make sure that this does not apply for the digital economy. As spokesperson for digital transformation of the Social Democratic Party in my regional parliament, I'm very interested in the question of how the future of work will look like. How can we improve women and youth economic inclusion in a digital economy? How will new technologies shape the way we live and the way we work? I'm convinced that digitalization and artificial intelligence have already a big effect of all our aspects in all our lives every day. However, especially as a social democrat, it is clear that we need rules and regulations to make sure that the digital transformation is not a wild transformation without any rules and without any regulation. So I think we need a digital transformation which is beneficial for all citizens, a digital transformation which leaves no one behind and respect basic rules. And I think also data protection, that is really important for us in Germany and I think in Europe. And in short, we need a transformation that has an aim to achieve more social justice in the end. This is where the question of digital divide becomes important. We cannot allow that the digital transformation increases the divide within our societies, but we should also not accept that the divide between North and South widens and existing inequalities increase. So as a board of the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, I'm glad that our office in Cairo, thank you, Richard, is organizing with A2K4D this webinar, and it is our aim as a foundation to help bridging gaps between North and South. As a foundation, it is also our aim to advocate for more justice, for more freedom and understanding around the world. And I'm glad that our office in Egypt is doing this together with you, Nagla, and all your team members. So thank you so much and thank you for participating. And I think we will have a great conference now. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you with us, Christina. Thank you so much for that. Dr. Nagla, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Farah. Thank you very much, Christina and Richard, also Shahir, FES Egypt. It's a pleasure to collaborate. And I'm very pleased that we are holding our workshop online this year and able to do that and see all those wonderful people and our company on the panel. I thank also my panelists and my team at A2K4D and Farah, of course. Let me then, without further ado, and in the interest of time, say a few words about the topic. I have, thought about how to tackle the topic, so I thought no better way than to look at the title and to just take it backwards: Women, Youth, and the Future of Work, Inclusion in Challenging Times. So I will start to say a few words about the future of work, challenging times. Then my second points will be about why women and youth, and my third will be about inclusion with brief notes on policies. And I know there we will get a chance to talk about policies in more detail, perhaps later in the round of questions and in the Q&A. So let me first start talking about the future of work. Technology and work, the link between technology and work, and the impact of technological revolutions on skill structures, disruptions to markets, and the resulting inequality in income distribution is not new. This has been happening through different, perhaps even industrial revolutions. In fact, a few years back, I was with my students, we were studying the impact of the ICT revolution and the literature by Eric Brian Olfsen and colleagues about the skill-biased technological change and how this leads to polarization and increasing divides between capital and labor on the one, as one divide, high skill versus low skill, superstars versus everyone else, and the inequalities entailed, and how the effect is that those with high skills end up at higher ends of the pay structure, with endemic inequality taking place in economies, even in the global north, not only in the global south. Another divide is between actually the global north and the global south, and I thank Christina for highlighting the importance of a dialogue and collaboration between different parts of the world. So this is not new, the idea of technology impacting skill structure, but what really is new here are two things. First is what is so-called the fourth industrial revolution: the scale, the scope, the speed, the pervasiveness of these technologies, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, quantum computing, etc., etc. This is just incredible, pervasive overtake of our lives. So this is the first thing. In fact, the World Economic Forum actually argue that in the recent Future of Jobs report 2020, that in 2025 the time spent on current tasks at work by humans and machines will be equal. This is as fast as machines are taking over. So, but the second new thing is, guess what? The pandemic. The pandemic came in, pushed us into scenarios that we had anticipated for further into the future. Amplified the threats and the challenges and perhaps even the opportunities. So again, the World Economic Forum, the report argued that 85 million jobs may be displaced by a shift in the division of labor between humans and machines by 2025. 97 million new roles may emerge and are more adapted to the new division of labor between humans, machines, and algorithms. So the future of work is no longer the future of work. It is here and now, and it is indeed the current reality of work. This is what is new. the nature of the technology, but also the pandemic, which has just given us what is termed a double disruption, boom. This is where we are today, and this is why we have to deal immediately and not wait. Why youth and women? Christina has very nicely alluded to it. Usually these end up being, at the perhaps closer to the marginalized groups in society, but also more importantly, we are in Egypt, we are in the MENA region, and youth and women have very unique characteristics. If you look at the demographic pyramid for our part of the world, the MENA region has the highest youth population shares in the world, 60% less than 25 years of age. So talk about future. Okay. At the same time, we have the highest rates of youth unemployment, unprecedented, 27 to 29%. It is worse for female youth, 39%. We also have, it ranges in different countries. We have unemployment of the educated. We have high rates of people with advanced education that are not part of the employment pie, if you will, a pool. We have, of course, high rates of female unemployment by gender. In Egypt, the latest I have is about 23%, in Tunisia, 22%, but it goes as high as 50% in Palestine, and also high rates in other parts of the region. Female youth labor force participation rate is actually quite low for the region. It's 29%, 13% for females, which are blatantly lower than the world average. So, additionally, we have informal economies in different, we are all aware of the informal sector, and may that be in the labor market, very high rates in different parts of the Arab world. But in Egypt, for example, almost taking up almost 60% of the labor force, 50% when work in agriculture is excluded, a little bit more than 50%. But also we have informal dwellers and informal settlements, and this is important, and I will come back to this in a couple of minutes. So in all of this, post-COVID-19, this is where we are. This is the reality. Why women and youth? Because we are in a context that has multifaceted inequality of opportunity, and then come COVID-19, inequality hits further, informal livelihoods, informal workers, even formal workers lose their work. We have a digital divide, multi-layered digital divide that feeds into a developmental divide against a backdrop of a labor market that has structural unemployment, mismatch between supply and demand of labor, but now cyclical unemployment with COVID-19 and the decline in the external sources of finance. So in all of this, we have a challenge, and inclusion clearly becomes an issue. A couple of words about women, and I want to zoom in on women, technology, and inequality. Multidimensional inequality is a reality for women, and women who live in rural areas are multidimensionally poor. So this translates into other aspects of inequality in the region and the marginalization of women. And then when we look at artificial intelligence and we look at data issues, women are likely to be further marginalized. They're likely to be further marginalized. First comes the inaccuracy of data, which is AI's primary input. So there is data blur when aggregation of data, their aggregates, it clouds out details needed from disaggregated data, especially on gender-sensitive issues like health and employment. Data inaccuracy can also be an outcome of top-down data collection methodologies, which miss activities and communities that fall outside the radar of the formal lens, resulting in a blindness, data blindness. They're just not there. And if they're not there, they will not be part of policy making, especially in times of crisis. So this invisibility of data feeds into a larger bias, and may feed into a larger bias in policy and other decision making that relies on AI algorithms being fed deficient data. So again, data on women in the financial sector, data on women living in informal dwellings, if the house is not in their name, or if they are, everything is the name of the husband. What happens to women at the end of the day is not really captured by a lens that has fine pixels that captures reality. So there's more about the biases in algorithms being typically developed in the global north that are trained on data sets that are not relevant to developing context. In a nutshell, women and youth stand to in this scenario of new technologies fourth industrial revolution, so-called fourth industrial revolution, and what's happening, especially with the hit of COVID-19, they stand to really be hardly hit. Now, yes, what happens then? I mean, it's not all that bleak, because at the end of the day, in fact, the rays of hope will come from youth and women. Rays of hope for inclusion will come in youth and women entrepreneurship. There is, we will hear from my colleagues on the panel, I'm sure, more about this. But despite all of this, there is hope in inclusion, in actually feminizing entrepreneurship, in feminizing innovation, in looking at youth and putting them as a priority, which Christina has very nicely mentioned. So in the few minutes that I have, I just mentioned a few things about policy, and then we can talk about details later on. I think the key is to create new opportunities in the labor market, to create opportunities for inclusion, consciously create opportunities through a holistic approach, active linkages, multiple partners, government, education institutions, private companies, civil society, international organizations, with an eye to targeting women and youth. This will take place at the level of government investments in sectors that heavily employ women. I have two different statistics, one from the World Bank that says that agriculture, female employment in agriculture is 20% of total female employment, and another figure that says it is less than 10%. I think it depends on whether the figure is market or extended labor. In any case, for artificial intelligence strategy for Egypt, for example, looks at agriculture as a priority. This is a fact. Now, it's very important that we are conscious that whatever technologies will be employed in agriculture, if indeed women, the female labor is significant there, that it's enabling for the work and not replacing. This is important. There's a distinction between enabling technologies and replacing technologies. There are statistics that the care economy, for example, women's employment is high in the service economy, education, healthcare, etc. So it is important to invest in these, not only because they are priorities for development, but also because they employ women, and we can actually provide a fantastic opportunity for women inclusion. Plenty of suggestions that I will mention later about reskilling, skill development, incentives and training for youth and women, prioritizing this, incentivizing the private sector to work with them. It's important to note that it's not just about safety nets, it's safety net and beyond safety nets for sustainable livelihood, not only for, to relieve the marginalized, but to actually establish sustainable livelihood ventures, and of course, bearing in mind the SDGs. It's very important to have data-driven policy making. There's plenty to be discussed about skill development, lifelong learning that I can keep for later discussion, but it's important for that there be investment in digital infrastructure, and there is a fantastic opportunity for telecoms and actually a need for telecoms to expand digital infrastructures in order to enable the digital transformation. And just to wrap up at this point, I emphasize that it is really no longer the future of work. It is the current reality of work. It's happening now, and we need to act fast. We need to invest in people and not in concrete. We need to not try to keep jobs, but try to actually upgrade people to fit the needs of the new economy. And it is really about coherent policy making that involves different stakeholders to improve the livelihoods of youth and women, and they can be actually the wild cards for promoting development in this part of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Dr. Nagla. Perhaps we could hear from Dr. Ayman next.
Thank you so much, Farah, and thank you, Nagla and A2K4D for really hosting this. Nagla, you provided a very nice picture on the macro dimension. So let me actually take it and jump a little bit to the micro and think about what happens. And let me start from the point that you mentioned about COVID. We're all going through that. We went through 3 stages. First one, we had the shock. Everybody was trying to figure out how to survive. Everybody was trying to figure out the safety aspects. What does it mean? The initial part, that was the spring. Then people moved from the point where this is a short-term situation to actually this is with us for quite some time, and there's actually going to have some permanent changes. People started talking about new normal, next normal, and the like. But mostly we're focused on the resilience part. I want to make sure my business or my family or my country is surviving through this. And I think we're going through this right now. But then soon, and I hope as soon as possible, we start thinking about the post-COVID and the opportunity part and the next normal and the new normal. I think this is where it's actually converging with the whole future of work narrative. A couple of years ago, we're talking about the future of work as it's something that might happen in the next decade. I think with COVID, it just basically said, you know what? You don't have a decade. This is happening today. Exactly what Negla mentioned. It's happening today. We're living through it. A lot of the things that we were waiting for it to happen over 2, 3, 4, 5 years happened actually in a couple of weeks. And we're starting to live through many of those trends. So if we start thinking about what's happening specifically in that at the sectoral level, rather than at the macro picture, you start to see every specific sector and industry is going through a very profound transition. So you look at the retail. Retail was moving into e-commerce. In the US, Amazon started 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. And people said, well, it's going to be the end of the malls. The end of the malls did not happen, but now it's happening. We're seeing a lot of malls in the US are closing. A lot of retail sector jobs are going away. And those are usually low-cost retail jobs that are very local. And most of them are moving into actually e-commerce. So what does that mean for the retail sector? We're starting to see the same thing happening in Egypt. When many places started shutting down, people wanted to find an e-commerce channel. So we're seeing the traditional retail going down and the e-commerce sector going up. You start looking at the financial services. The banks are the dominant kind of players in that sector, but we're starting to see a lot of fintechs. In Egypt, the banks are starting to get into fintechs, but there will be other smaller, interesting companies that are getting into that space. The healthcare part, we're starting to see a lot of platforms that are coming into how do I actually provide healthcare remotely? How can I order things remotely? How can I get access to services in a more cheaper, faster, more efficient way? You get into even the real estate sector, the most conservative traditional sector. When people are working from home, then you're starting to see a change in the business office space. You're starting people actually having to equip some of their homes with a home office. You're starting to see co-working spaces that were an interesting idea a few years ago. Now they're actually becoming an interesting option. And we're going to see a broader transition in that space. That's going to affect the real estate developers, the prices of the real estate market. So if you look at the sectoral level, you're starting to see really profound transition. Some sectors, retail is happening at a much faster pace. Some sectors, maybe real estate is going to take a little bit because of the nature of the sector. So that change is very interesting because some parts of the sectors are closing, shutting down, and some of these shutdowns started with COVID, accelerated by COVID, but they're permanent. And some parts are actually growing, emerging. So you look at the e-commerce, there are new jobs in delivery, there are new jobs in warehousing, there are new jobs around the distribution, there are new jobs around software developing for e-commerce platforms. There are new jobs around actually digital marketing and communication. So those are interesting new jobs. There is actually an e-commerce, informal e-commerce space that is huge in Egypt, where people are selling things on social media, and it's growing like crazy. So there are actually very interesting things that are happening in that space. And the economy it adapts. So even the informality gets into the digital age. So we have digital informal platform that is growing in a very interesting space. Government is trying to push for the formality. It might be easier to actually push for formalization when things are digital, but people find their way. When there are obstacles, kind of the economy adapts and people adapt. So that's the challenge and the opportunity. If we look at these parts, how do they affect youth and women? You see the short-term vulnerabilities. A lot of people are losing their jobs from traditional retailers, from traditional kinds of jobs. And these are targeting women and youth in a kind of in an overweight, in a really higher rate. Why? Because those are many of the actually targeting people actually who are lower income by nature. But you're starting to see other communities. So what does that mean for us? You have to think about transition, and I'll talk about this point in a few minutes. And then the second thing, we're seeing the new opportunities, but the new opportunities take time until they start picking up. So you have to think again about transition and about shaping those new opportunities. So this future of work, it's like every technological transition that we've had over time. And this is not the first industrial revolution or first technological transition we go through. and you cannot prevent it. You cannot actually kind of regulate it to a way that it disappears or delay it, because it's going to happen. It's just like the oil companies, oil and gas companies, trying to think that they can actually protect the oil and gas industry. There might be a shelf life for the oil and gas industry. It might last for a decade, but it is going down. ExxonMobil got out of the Dow Jones for the first time since the Dow Jones was created, because their market value is smaller, because the size of the economy is shrinking. It's an inevitable truth. So you cannot protect yourself from that change, but you can shape the change. And I think the question that comes for us is, how do we shape what's happening in that space? So digitalization is happening. The question is whether you call it future of work, digitalization, automation, industrial revolution, fourth industrial revolution, whatever the name is. And I'm sure people are very creative in branding that change. How do we shape that change? And the specific 2 points that we talk about. One is about managing the transition. So you have a stable economy, a stable technology for several decades, and now you get a rapid transition. Transition means people are losing jobs. And interesting enough, it's actually easier for youth because youth can adapt. It's very hard for people in the middle of their careers. The 40, 50 years old are actually the most challenged when you get the change in the job. If you're older, you might retire. If you're young, you will adapt. But in the kind of third segment of your career, that's a huge challenge. So how do you manage the transition? And how do you make sure that people survive through that transition and the social cost of that transition is manageable? There's part of it about reskilling, the education. We've been talking about it for a while, but it needs to happen in a more practical way. And the change in the educational sector by moving into digital is actually going to have a good impact on that, because you can offer cheaper courses, faster courses that are focused on specific skills that can help people adapt. And this is great. The second thing is about safety nets. I know Nagla talked about it, and it's very important to think about safety nets in a stronger way. In Egypt, when we had the COVID, the government was scrambling to actually send direct money to laborers who were temporary workers who had no livelihood. And the government wanted to send them money. And it took some time to create the technology platform, but we need to have a direct subsidy technology platform where the government can give direct subsidies. It leads to the whole UBI, universal basic income discussion, but I won't get into this. But there need to be a direct subsidy platform where governments can reach people and based on their needs can provide immediate short-term support for a crisis or for a normal situation. Safety nets are huge, and thinking about that in a big way. Third thing is about actually, in terms of the transition, thinking about policies that support that. How are we managing the policies during that transition? So that transition part is an interesting part. The second part is about shaping the next normal, the new normal, whatever you want to call it. What does it look like? Companies follow market opportunities. Market opportunities exist in large, big chunks of the economy. So as a company, I would target the 50, 60, 70% of the economy that's going to give me the great opportunity. And then what about the rest? The rest is not profitable. So I will not get into it unless there is a policy or there's a subsidy. The initial digital divide discussion happened in the US when people were talking about internet in rural areas. So it was very profitable for me as a T-Mobile or as a Verizon to provide internet in New York, but not in upstate rural, upstate New York. New York City is great profitability, rural, very low density. So the government started pushing for regulation for digital inclusion. Now we have to face the same thing across the board. When it comes to data, when it comes to other types of businesses, companies will not naturally go to areas where there is low profitability, and that's their right because their mandate is profitability, primary mandate, there's a lot more. But how do we actually push them, whether through incentives or whether through mandates, to actually make sure that we have full coverage, whether that is at the data level, whether that is at the decision-making level, whether that is at the service provision and coverage level for whatever we're getting into. So that's a very important part to keep. So if we're going to get into that next normal, companies look for the opportunity and they're kind of the vanguard of opening those new technologies, and that's brilliant. Government's job is to make sure that nobody's left behind. So we look at policies that are figuring out who's left behind, how can we make sure we support those who are left behind so that they can catch up. And that may take so many different policies: educational policy, inclusion policy, data policy, regulation, covering market coverage policies, and so on. So that's an important part to think about it from a policy perspective. So just to put these things together, that change is happening. It's happening fast. We're part of it today. The question is, we need to manage the transition so that people don't fall behind in the middle. And social turbulence during transition is a nasty thing that we all suffer from, including businesses. And the second thing, we need to shape what comes next so that it is inclusive. Businesses will go their own way for profit. Government need to make sure that nobody's left behind while that is happening and provide whatever it takes to get there. So I'll stop there and would love to follow up at the Q&A. Thank you, Farah. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Ayman. Perhaps we could hear from Nada next.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. And little disclaimer, I will, although I'm consultant with the IFC, I will be speaking on my personal capacity. So the usual disclaimer, these views are my own. So just as you may have read from my bio, I've spent my professional career in private sector business and finance. So I'm an investment banker, first helping private sector clients operate profitable businesses, and as a consultant for Arthur Andersen, then investing in sustainable, hence profitable private sector ventures for development impact for the IFC. I have started to be passionate about women empowerment quite late when I became the IFC regional manager, covering 3 countries, which were difficult because it included Yemen and Libya. And I wanted to build a strong team, and the best staff happened to be women. It was a revelation for me that these strong women did not apply for the leadership jobs proposed, and this for a variety of good reasons. This made me think hard on what conditions, sometimes very minor tweaking, I needed to do to the work environment to get the best team to deliver the program and the bottom line, which definitely these women did. I then started to look at the data. Data for me is very important, related to the women participation to the labor market. Firstly, I looked on the top level, the board of companies. The board, in fact, of a company is the ultimate authority within a company, playing a crucial role in setting a firm's direction, safeguarding the interest of shareholders, and holding management to action, which ultimately also means that internal policies, such as those related to women employment, would be discussed at this level. Well, globally, only 17% of corporate directors are women. And in the Middle East and North Africa, that number is just 2%. Gender discrimination at the board level is obviously bad for women who inarguably should have the same employment opportunity as men. But research also finds it's bad for business. There are a number of reports out there which show that gender diversity in the boardroom boosts profitability, innovation, which is very important, and growth while enhancing internal controls and raising employee morale. I'll just quote one study, 2016 OECD report, showing that companies with gender diverse executive committees outperform those without women in senior positions, achieving 47% higher returns on equity and 55% higher gross incomes. That's significant. Don't forget, I'm an investment banker. That same holds true in MENA. A series of recent studies from the IFC examined gender diversity in corporate boards in Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon. And the institution found that while women made up only a very small percentage of board members, their presence was a boon for the bottom line. Therefore, more women participation at the highest level becomes a business case. The second point I would like to make is on access to finance. Many women, and Ayman and Nagla, you mentioned, many women in emerging markets are self-employed. And access to finance is critical for 1, their survival, and 2, their growth. Yet in MENA, only 35% of women have bank accounts compared to 52% of men. That's the widest gap of any region in the world. What's more, around 30% small and medium enterprises in developing economies are owned fully or partially by women. Yet on average, only 10% of women entrepreneurs have access to the capital they need to grow their business. That's obviously problematic at a societal level, but it also represents a huge missed opportunity for lenders. More and more data results show that focusing on female clients not only benefits women entrepreneurs, it also provides banks with a growing and lucrative line of business, including the fintechs. Again, a number of reports show that female borrowers are usually more loyal to their banks than their male counterpart, suggesting that they may be more inclined to utilize one bank for their complementary financing needs. And at the same time, they have at least equally good or higher payback rates and more diligently adhere to payment schedules. IFC performs annual survey of its banking clients, over 150 worldwide. And for the past 4 straight years, women-led SMEs had outperformed those run by men when it came to repayment discipline and non-performing loans. If banks need more convincing, research also shows that women can provide a more diversified and stable retail deposit base, as they tend to save more than men relative to their income levels. Just an example, a bank in Lebanon has pioneered a profitable program for female borrowers called We Initiative, and their data helped measuring the program's performance over time. And these results were very strong, with internal rate of returns on its women's banking program standing at 34%, which again, in world of finance, is a commendable return on investment. So all these research indicate that female borrowers can be powerful contributors to a bank's growth and performance. So that's on the micro firm level and on the bank level, but on the macro level, a World Bank study was able to determine that Egypt's GDP could jump up to 32% if men and women participated equally in the labor market. In Egypt, women have less than a quarter of all existing jobs. Female labor force participation is far below the global average. When women participate in Egypt's labor force, they continue to be concentrated in lower ranking and in lower paying jobs. In fact, only 7% of Egypt's firms are led by a female top executive. And women in Egypt are still paid less than men for equal work. The gender wage gap currently stands at 22%. In addition, only 16% of firms in Egypt are co-owned and 4% of firms are majority owned by women. Why is that? So many of the barriers keeping women out of the job market or in low quality employment exists because job opportunities for women are limited and working conditions are largely inadequate for them. For example, women in Egypt are faced with a lack of flexible work arrangement. That's what I found even at a corporate level, a lack of quality, affordable childcare that can accommodate women's family responsibility, a lack of transport infrastructure, as well as overall cultural norms that discourage women from pursuing employment and careers. Barriers stopping women from starting a new or growing an existing business include limited access to finance, and where we're going to talk more about limited access to technology and market opportunities, including the integration and the supply chains and access to the corporate buyers. All these are barriers to women's entry and advancement into the economic space. And all these barriers have now been exacerbated by COVID. So removing these barriers takes commitment and investment on the part of the government and the private sector. But the potential benefits to both women and companies and national GDPs are considerable and can be quantified. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nada. Ahmed, please go ahead.
First of all, I'm very thankful to be invited. Thank you, Dr. Nagla, very much for your kind invitation. Very happy to be amongst that amazing panel, and honestly, all the numbers and all the research statistics that we have heard so far are pretty much, I want to say shocking, but they're very, very insightful. So let me maybe start with a very, very personal experience from my end on, since I'm in a bit into the entrepreneurship scene and the investment scene and so forth. So let me tell you a little bit of a story about my wife. So we just had a baby, Lara, and she's 7 months old. And 9 months ago, my wife actually started her own company, and this company was working to empower women in underprivileged areas. So think of the women who are married with kids and they have no jobs, and her platform was to connect these women to, you know, kind of helper jobs. So going to, for example, clean houses or do some spa kind of work to people and so forth. And like, she was 7 months pregnant when she started, and then once she started, she launched, she got a lot of requests, and her platform was scaling very heavily, and she was very excited. And then two things happened: Laura came, and COVID came. And at this point, she had to stop because, you know, her platform, what the platform did was to bring women inside people's houses, and she used to train them, give them how to handle their clients, what not to say. She gave them like phones, and she trained them on how to use the phone, the WhatsApp, and so forth. And when this happened, it made me realize that women, and this was an insight to me, that women have it differently, completely differently than men when it comes to career progression. Because, for example, when women give birth, that's kind of, giving birth is not just easy. It has a lot of psychological and a lot of stress that comes with it. So my wife is very ambitious, and she actually helped me a lot when I was starting my company, and helped me to put the strategy, how to create my service model, how to be competitive, and so forth. And when she tried to do it, the birth came in, and of course it held her back a little bit. So this gave me the view that maybe it's with women, it's never a straight line. So it's never just progress through your career. You'll progress through the steps. There are some hurdles in the way. I don't want to say hurdles, but maybe it's not a straight line. So let me put it at that. And this gave me a lot of insight on her business. Was all about getting women from an underprivileged area to train them and give them jobs, and she faced a lot of problems with discipline, for example, with women being uncommitted and so forth. And she had to deal with a lot of cultural issues on vetting these women and how to bring them, to make them they don't impose any danger on their clients. So that's one story I'd like to start with. And when we were discussing her project, usually the discussion, when she was very excited on the impact, and she's all about creating this transformative impact on the women labor market, and doing something with a very powerful social aspect to it. That I actually, in my company, we started an impact department, and although we're not a social enterprise, but it was very inspiring, her thinking about the impact. On the other hand, I was very excited on the tech part of it. So I thought about, we usually had discussions around, I can help you, I can build you an AI to vet these women faster, to bring these women faster to their clients. And the discussion had this format. So she thinks about the impact, she thinks about how many women she can train, how many women she can bring out of the unemployment to the employment and having income, and how she can bring them insurance, like medical insurance, maybe social insurance, and so forth. And I was always speaking about the technology and how this technology could be transformative and so forth. And this led me to think on two fronts. So why I got interested in technology and why I got very excited about AI, and thankfully I work in the field right now, because I was brought up loving and playing a lot with video games, very excited about science fiction movies, and these were all great inspirations to me. Though when it comes to the bringing up of girls and women and so forth, maybe they don't have the same triggers as males or boys do. So usually they're not very much into video games, they're not very much into science fiction movies and so forth. So maybe a lot of them, and I've read this very interesting statistic, I think a few days ago, while doing the research for this event, that I think only 23% of all STEM graduates are females. And that's very staggering, because, and I think this might be attributed to the maybe how girls are brought up, not being very much curious on how curious on the technology, curious on the gaming, curious on the these exponential or these advancement in technology. This is why maybe more men are into STEM and are into tech and computer science related field, and maybe women are not many of the women are not as excited as men when it comes to this. So this maybe also has a cultural aspect. And like Dr. Nagla was speaking a little bit ago, that the job market is changing, which presents maybe an opportunity, and it presents a bit of a hurdle, because computer science jobs and jobs that have to do with, for example, AI and data processing and so forth, maybe these jobs are becoming much more hot right now, and the pay is high, and these talents are very rare in the market. And of course, by the trajectory I was speaking about, that more men are getting qualified in this area way more than women, and maybe this has to change. One example is I always ask myself, why are there not maybe dedicated programming and computer science courses for women who don't have, because when it comes to computer science, when it comes to AI, like what Google is currently doing, they're making like a certification process, like a 6-month certification process, that actually they say that this is at par with a university degree. So maybe it might be a good idea to think on getting more women, even if they don't have a college degree, even if they just they have a basic education level, to maybe get them onto, for example, coding and getting into programming, and maybe this can open up a few opportunities. So let me go back to the point of this job market changing, and the relevance of the skills to the job market. Like from a personal experience as well, when I started my company, we were like 18 or 17 people in the company, 17 engineers in the company, and we were hiring our very first girl with us. And I had to disclose this before hiring her. I told her that you will be the first girl in the team, and this wasn't something I was very happy of. But when we post for jobs, like most of the applications, most of the programmers, most of the data scientists are men. So when we hired her, I had to disclose that I hope this is not uncomfortable for you, but you'll be the first woman on board. And currently, thankfully, the team is diversified, and this girl is now leading one of our major products in the company. But again, this was a very not a very comfortable situation. So So this is also another thing when it comes to the diversity of the talent and the talent in this AI and data science pool. Also something I've realized when it comes to the entrepreneurship market that I haven't, in my experience, maybe there is, but I haven't seen them. I haven't seen a company CTO, a woman company CTO, Chief Technical Officer, and this is also very intriguing because maybe yes, maybe even when the companies are led by women, so you can find I have found a lot of women CEOs, I have found a lot of women COOs, but it's very rare to find a woman CTO. Although the technical team might have a lot of women and a lot of girls in the team, developers, back end, front end, the full stack developers, software engineers, but it's very rare, maybe in the region, that I have found a woman CTO, which is also something to ponder about. Now, one of the opportunities that also, of course, one of the big problems, like Dr. Nagla said, is the data bias and how AI algorithms are being trained on data that might not represent truth. For example, there is the famous case of Amazon when they did this predictive algorithm to predict, to analyze the applicants coming in and then predict if these applicants can reach executive levels and can reach leadership levels. And they found that the algorithm was extremely biased against women. And this is because most of the executives, like Ms. Nella said a few moments ago, that most of, like 17% are only women. So maybe this had an inherent bias in the data, and this have led the algorithm to be actually discriminant against women. Though when it comes to Corona coming in, it has proved something very interesting, that data actually has a shelf life. So and data is always changing. For example, when the consumer behavior, e-commerce consumer behavior during Corona what actually confused the algorithms. So for example, also another case with Amazon, people were buying electronics, people were buying books, people were buying stuff, and suddenly the behavior changed to people buying toilet paper, and then the algorithm was super confused what's happening, and couldn't actually, the recommendation engines went a little bit bust, so they had to retrain the algorithm and fix their algorithms. So data with Corona now, people are thinking that, okay, people have seen that data has a bias, and how can we debias the data? And this is, in the data science community, is a big topic, and many people are actually working to synthesize data sets that to debias the data sets so that as to train algorithms that are more, that can be extrapolate, or can be leveraged against a more general population. Another thing when it comes also to the job market and the jobs changing and so forth. Now, when it comes to funding and funding, projects, startups, or small companies, of course, again, and reiterating what Ms. Nella said, that banks are very much reserved when it comes to funding SMEs because of the higher risks, because of the higher, because they don't have enough data. They're maybe working in an informal sector. Most of the transactions within, for example, a country like Egypt, many of the companies working on cash-based transaction without invoices, without proof of income. So this can lead banks to not actually fund SMEs or not actually fund projects that might have a bigger societal impact. Another thing, when it comes from the VC point of view, of course, during Corona and during COVID, many VCs went on the defensive. And like in a region like ours, where the opportunity cost is very high, so you don't have a lot of, you don't have a humongous pool of exciting startups coming out, and the funding is kind of limited as opposed to, for example, Silicon Valley or in Europe, for example. So usually VCs have to make decisions. So maybe if a company has a very interesting maybe R&D project to work, for example, on as an example, working on a blood analysis tool, for example, but this will take 4 or 5 years to develop and then become monetized. Usually this is, this is not as exciting as a company that would make revenues in the next 6 or 12 or 24 months, for example. So also this can be a limiting factor when it comes to funding projects and funding funding startups and so forth. So financing from these two parts maybe is blocking some very, very interesting projects that are coming out, and maybe these projects can come out and build something impactful to the community. When AI can kick into this part, and artificial intelligence, for example, like alternative credit scoring, and AI can be used to maybe help banks and help financial institutions decide and approve some of these companies and give them access to finances. And this is maybe one of the positive sides when it comes to how artificial intelligence can be used to empower the market and empower the different sectors and empower people who don't have regular income as well, because like some of the women my wife was helping, they didn't have regular jobs, so they didn't have a proof of income, so they couldn't go to the bank, for example, and ask for a loan to finance their children education or get a house or do any of this stuff. So I have to stop here, I think. So thank you very much again for being invited to this very eventful panel, and yeah, I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. Thank you all for your insights. Before moving on to Q&A, perhaps we could unpack some of the themes that were discussed by our panelists. So let me start with Ahmed having shared a personal perspective, and I'm sure Dr. Ayman can speak to this as well. How do we see the entrepreneurship scene in Egypt in general, navigating difficulties that were brought on by the pandemic over the past few months? We could start with Ahmed and then move on to Dr. Ayman.
Sure. So, of course, many startups have struggled. They lost a lot of cash. Others have actually got a very powerful surge suddenly in demand for their product, and they couldn't fulfill it. So, and some of them, Corona was actually very, very positive to them, especially people who work, for example, in SaaS software, or who don't need to be physically present or need physical presence to interact with their customers. That's one thing from the startup side. From the VC side, as I was saying, maybe the VC became a little bit more conservative on funding projects that maybe would take longer to create the product. And of course, this is not the best. Especially in our region where the startup ecosystem is booming, we don't need to be conservative right now. Maybe we need a little bit of more risk and more access to finances. So I'll leave it to Dr. Ayman to maybe build on.
Thank you, Ahmed. Dr. Ayman, please go ahead.
Thank you, Farah. Thank you, Ahmed. I think, as I mentioned earlier, there was probably a few weeks or maybe a couple of months of shock where people did not understand what was happening. And I think many of them tried to just do the short-term adaptation or work on safety and operations and so on. But very quickly, I think once people figured out that this is something that's there to stay for a long term, it was a matter of survival and resilience. So if you think about it, looking from a startup perspective, there are some startups where their business model was actually very compatible and benefited a lot from what happened. People working in e-commerce, people working in things that were content, online content, and so on. And for those, it was a matter of just, I want to continue to deliver, and I actually want to get to this newer, bigger market that's actually helping. So that's one kind of startup. There were other types of startups that their business actually was not compatible with what's happening. People who were looking for example, people going out to restaurants and booking for them, or people going out to retailers. Those had big problems. Some of them either tried to completely shift into other businesses. Some of them had to shut down at some point in time. Some of them stayed idle for a while until things opened up. So it depends on their ability, their actually kind of the resilience, their internal resilience. How much cash do they have? How much can they continue with their business not operating? So it remains a challenging time. I think those who will come out of it, either those who adapted, pivoted, or those who actually the business models were compatible, I think they're going to be in a much better situation because they will be able to kind of get on the next wave. From the ecosystem support organizations, I think many of the support organizations try to continue their support, continue their help, advice, move into online platforms. And many of them were doing that in a good way. At AUC Venture Lab, we continued and shifted everything online, and it is working. We missed the personal interaction, but we managed to do our job and do what we had to do. From the investment side, I agree with Ahmed. I think most of the investors, they kind of operated as if this is, let's put everything on hold and figure out what's going to happen. And I think, honestly, I think that was a reasonable decision for a few weeks or a couple of months. But I think that beyond that, I think it was actually a very unreasonable decision because the opportunities, and now once you understand the situation, the opportunities that are out there are actually more interesting, have higher potential, and they're actually in deeper need. So practically you can get better deals. But I've seen a lot of conservatism in the investment space that remains probably till now. I'm starting to see more people looking back at companies now, last month actually, and now I started to see more of them starting to look beyond COVID. But I wish that there is a lot more than that. I think the startups had to carry a big part of the burden of what's happening with very limited support.
Thank you, Dr. Ayman. So moving on to gender, which is one of the big themes of today's talk, we've seen how the impact of the pandemic has also been gendered. So as Ahmed mentioned earlier. So if I may address this to Nada, what do you think has been the general impact of the pandemic on women in the workforce, whether in corporate positions or otherwise?
Well, I mean, I looked, again, I like data, so I made some research, and there's an excellent report published by McKinsey that looked at the effect of COVID on women. And basically, I mean, as I was mentioning in introduction, I mean, all the major points why women don't join the workforce have been exacerbated by COVID. So by McKinsey's calculation, women's jobs are 1.8 times more vulnerable to this crisis than men's jobs. Women make up 39% of global employment, but account for 54% of overall job losses. I think that's quite staggering. So why is that? Firstly, and it was mentioned before, the nature of work remains significantly gender specific. Women and men tend to cluster in different occupations in both mature and emerging economies. This in turn shapes the gender implication of the pandemic. The research shows that female jobs are 19% more at risk than male ones, simply because women are disproportionately represented in sectors negatively affected by COVID. Accommodation, food services, retail, wholesale. Although I have to put a caveat, this is not the case in every country. For example, France, I don't know why, has not followed that trend. However, these particularities only explain 1% of the gender gap vulnerability. So what drives the other 3/4? Well, these are mostly the same reasons explaining why women participation in the labor force is low in the first place. COVID has just exacerbated these. The important factor is the burden of unpaid care, the demands of which have grown substantially during the pandemic. Women do an average of 75% of the world's total unpaid care work, including childcare, caring for the elderly, cooking and cleaning, etc. In some regions, including the Middle East, women's share of unpaid care work is as high as 80 to 90%. So as COVID has disproportionately increased the time women spend on family responsibility, it is not surprising that women have dropped out of the workforce at higher rates than explained by labor market dynamics. Another factor would be COVID's disproportionate impact on female entrepreneurship, including women-owned micro-enterprise in developing countries, where such enterprise account for a high share of female labor force participation. Again, they needed to leave, I mean, the example was there, you needed to leave your family, your enterprise to take care of the family. But also, crisis may have made some family resources scarce, such as financial capital to invest in business or digital devices that families must now share with children's schooling, since children's schooling has gone online. Women are on average 17% less likely to use the internet, and that's where your digital divide is very important. So numbers from the ITU, 17% likely to use the internet and 20% less likely to own a smartphone than men. Such digital divides are making it difficult for women-owned enterprises to adjust their operation amidst national lockdowns, right? To sell, to reach their supply chain. And again, I was mentioning access to finance. Well, liquidity constraints are amplifying pre-crisis unmet credit gap, which the IFC estimates at 1.48 trillion faced by women-owned small and medium enterprise. Finally, last but not least, attitudes also shape how women experience the economic consequence. For example, according to the Global World Values Survey, more than half the respondents in many countries in South Asia and MENA agreed that men have more right to a job than women when jobs are scarce. About 1 in 6 respondents in developed countries said the same. So what needs to be done? Again, the fact that an increase of women's participation in the economy boosts GDP growth is now a well-accepted fact, documented by World Bank, IMF, other statistics. And this report, which I found really interesting, argues that a 20 to 30% more investment that would be spent in a business as usual case in 5 areas: education, family planning, maternal mortality, digital inclusion, and unpaid care work, would result in 6 to 8 times higher the economic benefit as compared to the social spending required. That means that every single additional dollar spent in narrowing the gender gap could be multiplied by 6 to 8 times for the benefit of the entire society. And it's not just countries that stand to gain from investing in women and girls. I gave so many examples that private sector, be it the real sector at the company level or at the financial sector, benefits from gender diversity. McKinsey found too that those who had diversity, that had more diversity in their executive teams, were 25% more likely to have above average profitability. So really, I will end by quoting the last sentence of this report. Parity is powerful, and this is the time for policymakers, but also business leaders to step up, put some money, and make it a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Nada. So on the policy front, which has come up quite a lot during this webinar, Dr. Nagla, you stressed the importance of consciously creating opportunities. So could I ask you to speak to the kind of policies needed to ensure a digitally inclusive environment for women and youth in the region?
Thank you, Farah. I will be brief to allow time for Q&A. So I will try and speak on keywords. When we think of inclusion, policies for inclusion, we think grounds up and we think targeting. This is crucial. And when we talk about policies in this day and time, we cannot have policies in silos. There has to be collaboration. Education institutions, private sector, government, civil society. We talk a lot about skilling. We can actually have fantastic initiatives for reskilling, upskilling, cross-skilling, getting people to skills between the different fields Investment in education is fantastic, but it will bear fruit in 10 or 12 years. I want to skill people today, and I want to skill people who are already on the market, employed or unemployed, who are young, the women. This has to be done with conscious, agile, flexible policies, collaboratively. The key word is collaboration, with active linkages between the different players in the market. So that's one aspect. It's very important to have proper information and data about the market in order to actually match the skill structure with market demand. There is very limited information and data about what's happening in the market, and quite often the data is conflicting. We use data and we find data that's continuously conflicting and needs to be cleaned up. Talking about data, regulatory environment, I know that Christina talked about data protection, but also I was very interested in open data. I know Ahmed and I had this discussion maybe a couple of years ago about if data were accessible for businesses, data-driven innovation, opening up of data for going back to entrepreneurship and initiatives by youth and possibly by women, opening up data, access to data, competition, encouraging competition and giving the floor for small and medium enterprises. I want to address Richard's comment about the gig economy, addressing the informal economy. I know people speak about formalizing the informal economy. It's not about formalizing the informal, it will just drive them away because they don't want to pay taxes. How can the government creatively engage with what actually exists? I mean, this is a reality. How can we make the best of it? And the informal, we all know the informal economy has kept the Egyptian economy going for decades. Perhaps not so much recently, but still, through the financial crisis, through the political disruptions, the informal economy is there and it's actually developing, as Ayman mentioned, the digital informal economy. How can this be actually an engine of growth? People who want to work and want to provide these services, a lot of women are engaged in these services. So these are all creative policies, creative takes of collaborative activities between the different players. For example, the universities, our universities, AUC and Nile University and a few private universities have initiatives on data science, and the German University and others. This, I want to think grounds up. How can we actually extend this? I know that Kafr Sheikh University, I believe, has a department or a faculty for artificial intelligence and data science. That's not enough. We need to think grounds up, and this is the only way for inclusion. We cannot think top down in attempting to deal with this. Just very quick, couple of quick points. Also, simple technologies. We don't have to have top of the line technologies. We can use, telephones, mobile phones, but also television or radio. You have to be creative in the technologies. They don't have to be top of the line technologies. And then at the end of the day, it is a question of incentivizing businesses. Businesses need to be incentivized. The private sector, as Ayman said, is motivated by the profit. That's fine. It's incentivized by the profit motive, but it's very important to incentivize the private sector to engage with the training and skilling of people. And for example, giving tax breaks or advantages for diversity, gender diversity, or actually rehiring people, training people and making sure that they can keep them and retain them. So it is not about keeping jobs, it is about keeping people, especially given the skill structure in our part of the world. I will stop there because I want to leave room for Q&A. Thank you all, fantastic presentations. I really enjoyed and learned from everyone. So I will leave the floor. Farah, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Nagla. We have time for a very brief Q&A session curated from our chat box. And I will ask speakers to please keep your answers to 2 minutes maximum so we can take as many questions as possible. Let's kick it off with a question from Christina. I know that Christina has a question for Dr. Nagla and Nada. So please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Farah, and thank you all for your inspiring remarks. My question is, Nagla, you mentioned that the MENA region has a very high, or the highest rate of youth unemployment and a very high rate of female unemployment. And Nada, you said that women are lower paid for equal work than men, and it's sad, but it's the same in Germany. And my question is, and I think you just give us some answers, do you see solutions which are currently based in the digital transformation for especially these problems, that digitalization becomes a real chance for women and for the new generation? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nada, would you like to go first, and then I'll pick up? Thank you, Christina.
Nagla, I think you're the expert on that one. I think my point is the private sector, we were mentioning tax breaks and so on. I think, data is really very, very important to show that, in fact, it doesn't need tax breaks. It just needs to focus on the bottom line and what is good for business. I was giving my own personal example. It was simply, I wanted the best, and the best gave me they couldn't take the position because they needed to take care for children and so on. So technology, yes, in very little tweaks at the business, like allowing work from home, meetings, meetings online, no meetings between 10 before 10 and after 4 because of taking care of those who had taken care for children, was extremely, very, very minor, and gave super good results and boosted my bottom line. And I think, data, using the digital tools, and again, all these data that we were getting from profitability at the board, of the impact of the board on access to finance, this data has allowed that. And then the second point is that digital equipping women entrepreneurs with, digitalization will help them on all the points that they cannot access to market, supply chain management. So, there are so many benefits to it on that. And I think, just focusing on the profitability and the outcome and the bottom line, for me, sometimes it's a mystery. How come other people don't see it? Again, investing, it's a matter of return on investment. Even at GDP level, you get more out at a very good return than when you put in. Sorry, probably I was too long.
Thank you, Nada. I'll build on what Nada said. In addition to what Nada said, Christina, I think, in addition to the women on board and work, etc., I would actually look at what exists on the ground and work with it. There's an incredible pool of women entrepreneurs. Just look at the food. Again, talking about personal experiences, I looked for sources of caterers, who cook at home and provide the service. It's huge in Egypt. Women who provide this service from their own homes and through Facebook pages or WhatsApp, etc. This is just one example. So my answer to you is, let's work with what is there. And maybe this also addresses Richard's point about the gig economy. There are initiatives. Women want to work, but as Nada said, they want, flexible working conditions. They want to work from their homes. So what exists, and let's encourage that. And this will be a fantastic opportunity to engage women, and actually at the same time, maybe have linkages with other businesses. Maybe have these caterers connect them to restaurants. Think of creative ways of using what we already have. What I'm trying to say is that there exists already initiatives by women who want to work and who are working, but it is not well captured. And if we stick to, informal, formal, what the mainstream thinking is, it will not take us anywhere. It needs creative thinking and creative ways of engaging women workers, either in the office, as Nada mentioned, or actually from their own homes. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you both. I'm seeing a question from a while ago from Nadine. I believe it's addressed to Dr. Ayman about the current pronounced loss of retail jobs due to the pandemic, and whether it's something that's temporary that may rebound or level off in the future.
Thank you, Farah. If you look at whatever was lost during the pandemic, some parts of it will come back, some parts of it will not come back. The parts that will come back are people rebounding and getting back to their normal day-to-day jobs. So I used to go out and eat in a restaurant. I stopped. Now I'm going to go out and eat again in a restaurant. So that's going to come back. Then you're going to think about it. Did I change my behavior? So out of the, I don't know, once a week that I go out, now 2 of those times I will go out. The other 2, I might order something at home. So if that change in behavior is happening, then that means that there will be more jobs for the delivery side and less jobs for the restaurant side. We don't know what's the percentage of the change in people's behavior that is going to stick and what is going to rebound. And a lot of people have different hypotheses, and I think it will depend on the sector. I used to order things, go and buy things from a retail shop in the mall or whatever. Now I'm ordering them online. When I can go back to the mall and I feel safe and happy and all of that, would I go back to the mall? Well, maybe part of my shopping is going to go back and part of it is not going to go back. What is the breakdown? What is the percentages? We don't know. That's the interesting part. And that is what's going to affect. In retail, in commerce, in many of those spaces, part of it will stick with us, but we don't know. Just one point, Farah, and I wanted to comment on some of the couple of previous questions about the designing the work for women and the women participation in the workforce. Just 2 points. One, I do a lot of surveys and work with entrepreneurs from all sides, from the tech entrepreneurs all the way to the micro enterprises. And one thing that I notice is a lot of the time women do not respond to the questions affirming or saying that they're doing that kind of job. So you ask the question to a man, are you a business owner or manager? He would say yes. A woman who's doing the same thing, she would probably say no, because she's thinking of her primary job as I'm staying at home, but I'm doing something minor to complement my income. But in reality, she is running a business, and that business includes people and staff and everything, but she's not acknowledging that. So we have part of the data gap is coming from actually the way we ask the question and the way women think about their participation in the labor force. Is it actually a participation, or is it a side job for what they may perceive as a primary responsibility? So we need to be very careful in what we ask, what we measure, and how does it actually affect our perception? Because from what I see in reality, women participation in the labor force in Egypt is higher than the numbers. But the numbers are there. The second point is we're talking about the digital economy and how it would affect women in general. If we are designing the digital jobs to mimic our old industrial culture where you have to go to the factory and be there at 9 o'clock because everybody needs to be there in the same thing, then we are designing those jobs for exclusion. The beauty of being digital is re-engineering whatever you're doing, redesigning the job, redesigning the work, adding what the digital allows you to do, which is more flexibility, different types of communication, different location of work, different flexible payment methods, different adjustment in the level of effort, different way of management, different way of accountability. If you're redesigning the nature of the job itself so that it fits with the women's lifestyle, it is not designed for a male lifestyle, then there's going to be more participation. Our jobs are designed for a male lifestyle. And therefore, when we talk about adding more women, we're just telling the woman, change your life to look like a man and go get the job that the man is doing. And then you might be paid or not in the same salary. But if you redesign the job to fit with a different culture, with a different lifestyle, with the different requirements, then you're going to get more women who are participating in the way that fits their own choices and lifestyles and social norms wherever they live in the world. So that's something to think about in redesigning the digital jobs. Thank you, Farah.
Thank you, Dr. Ayman. There's also an interesting intervention by Richard about click workers and crowd workers as an emergent group of workers and the kind of social protection that group needs. Richard, could I ask you to maybe elaborate on the terms for our audience and perhaps direct the question to one of our speakers?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I don't want to monopolize here the room, so maybe we could give the questions to others or bring them together. No, I'm just wondering, I mean, in Germany, it's a big question. How do we actually socially protect those who work in internet as click workers in very informal settings, which we do not know so much in Germany, in our German labor market. So maybe actually we could learn also from Egypt what could be solutions to integrate them in social protection, because it's, as I said, it's not only about giving and creating work opportunities, it's about creating decent work opportunities, it's about creating good work. So, I mean, I don't know who maybe did some research on this. I mean, Nagla did research almost on everything, so probably Nagla is the right person to ask.
Sure, please, Dr. Nagla, go ahead.
Thank you. Again, I don't want to monopolize. I want to make sure. I'll say very quickly, yes, we did research on the Uber drivers in Egypt a couple of years ago, and we actually did an interesting one on women ride sharing in Egypt, which was quite interesting because we heard their story, listened to their stories about breaking social taboos. etc. So at the time, Egypt has taken some steps to towards regulating the drivers of ride-sharing services, etc. The one thing I would say is that the ride-sharing is very context-specific in that particular case. So in Egypt, for example, the way it was done, you have the informal sector. So you really have three sectors. You have the formal sector, and you have the informal sector, and then you have this new animal, which is hard to place. So the context matters very much in this particular case. We can chat, after that about this one in particular. I should say that we are part of a network with Oxford Internet Institute about the Fair Work Foundation, actually with research on gig workers in different parts of the world. We just joined this network recently, so there will be more to look into that, and I'm happy to take that conversation further after that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Our time is unfortunately up, so before we wrap up, we'd like to ask our audience to please contribute to an upcoming study on data and AI in the Middle East and North Africa by taking this very brief survey that my colleague will now drop in the chat box. But you can also find it on all our social media platforms. Thank you in advance, and thank you so much to all of our panelists for this very informative and exceptional panel. Thank you to our audience for tuning in, and take care and be well until we meet face to face.
Thank you very much. Can I just say, take a minute to thank you, Farah, thank my panelists, Ayman, Ahmed, Nada, great panelists and friends, and thank again Christina and Richard for collaboration on this project. I learned from each and every one of you, and I hope to continue the conversation further beyond this meeting. And great thanks to our team at the Access to Knowledge for Development Center and the team at FES Egypt, and to our wonderful audience for joining us and for interacting also on the chat. Thank you all so very much. Have a great evening or morning, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nagla. Thank you, Farah.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all. Pleasure being with you.
Bye-bye now. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.